Okay, welcome. It is 12 o'clock on the dot, so we will get started. Can I get some sort of indication, Dr. Warren, I see you, and Priscilla, that you can hear me well?
Yes, I can hear you.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. So let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to our spring 2021 relaunch of Academic Black Table Talk, a platform designed to elevate Black voices, knowledge, and expertise within Minnesota State, with special attention to elevating the voices of Black women. I am Dr. Ida Watts, socialpreneur by night, and by day, Chief Diversity Officer and Affirmative Action Officer with North Hennepin Community College. I designed this platform to serve as a learning resource that informs both your personal and organizational strategic approach for racial justice, gender equity, and inclusion from the vantage point of Black scholar practitioners navigating global anti-Blackness. So before we begin, I do want to thank the Minnesota State Office of Equity and Inclusion under the leadership of attorney Andrea Dees for helping us amplify these very important conversations. I thank you for your support and for your solidarity. There she is. Hello, Andrea. I read up on you now.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon. So let me introduce you to the folks at the table. So joining me today, yes, you do see Andrielle with the team there. We have Terrence and Kyle who's helping us logistically. And we also have Priscilla Mayowa, North Hennepin Community College student and lead MN president. John Harper, Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at South Central College and Interim Director of Admissions. He is a graduate of Minnesota State University Mankato. We have Dr. Brittany M. Williams, PhD, Assistant Professor of Higher Education at St. Cloud State University, and American Association for University Women American Fellow. Dr. Williams holds multiple grants and awards for her work on the study of Black women and girls. Dr. Gabriel Warren, MBA, Program Director and Assistant Professor of Marketing at Bemidji State University. Dr. Warren was appointed as the Academic Affairs Project Coordinator for the IFO statewide office and serves on several boards locally and statewide. And also joining us is Dr. Michael J. Self Sr., PhD, Assistant Provost at Metropolitan State University. In his role, he focuses on enhancing academic effectiveness and ensuring institutional compliance with regional and program-specific accreditation agencies. His over 20-year career includes both as an educational administrator and classroom teacher. Welcome, panelists.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. So let's get into it. It's Black History Month, notably the shortest month of the year. The topic on our table is our history and our presence in higher education. Are Black people celebrated or just tolerated? So we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm asking all the panelists this question. Why is Black history important or significant to you?
I think I'll jump right in. Good afternoon to my fellow panelists and the audience. Black history is important because it is American history, right? And for whatever reason, we live in a global world, in the United States in particular, that has a nasty infatuation with diminishing African-American history and diminishing Black history, especially as it pertains to our African-American women that are in academia, in higher social circles, and the contributions that they have made to this country. It's tough for us right? And it's not just that like, oh yeah, we get a month there, we can jump and celebrate it. No, I celebrate every day. And I believe a lot of my colleagues would say the exact same thing. And so to diminish and take out the contributions that African Americans have made since the Revolutionary War is wrong. It's important, not just to us, but it's important that we recognize and that we honor all of the work that our leaders and champions have paved the way for us, right? We talk about individuals like, we talk about individuals like Rosa Parks and Dr. King. That's all well and good, but there are so many individuals that have contributed in a greater sense, so to speak, and in ways that a lot of us couldn't even possibly imagine, to the education world, to the women's suffrage movement, to the civil rights movement, that are currently in Congress. And just, there needs to be a deeper, more appreciation for us as African American individuals, and not just what we bring to the table, but the amount of resiliency and the amount of racial battle fatigue that we all go through as it pertains to Black history. Black history is American history. And there's a lot of individuals that are joining us that were not taught about Black history, so to speak.
Thank you, John. And in the interest of time, we're going to continue on, and we are going to come back to everything that you've said, because you've mentioned a lot of great key points. Dr. Williams, what about you? Why is Black history important or significant to you?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So this is actually a little bit of a hard question for me to answer, because it's almost like asking me, why is it important to have air to breathe? I think for me, it's about centering the contributions of Black people and that Black people have made that have been rendered invisible and otherwise ignored. So we continue to face systemic exclusion, and Black History Month is a way to honor the beauty of our survival, our perseverance, and our continued success despite the roadblocks that are placed in front of us. So for me, specifically as a daughter of the Black American South, Black History Month is a way to pay homage to the very things, people, places, creations that matter, and a way to honor our continued existence.
Thank you. And Dr. Warren?
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. The only two things I would add or build upon is that, one, Black history is not being taught in our schools. And I think it's important because we don't know a lot about our history. So, we need to be able to have that focus to know that, hey, Black history is something that should be taught in our school systems, because there's a lot of Black people who are operating in our country who don't know a lot about our history. And then the other thing is, I think kind of John hit on it a little bit, but a lot of times we look back in the past and we celebrate Black history from a historical perspective, but we forget to celebrate that Black history is still happening every day around us. And that is really important for us to be able to note.
Thank you. And Dr. Self?
Much like Dr. Warren, just two comments. One, Black History Month is important to me because I identify as a Black American, which is in my mind slightly different from being an African American. And I think it's important to keep the word Black involved, because that's very dear to me and it's very specific. The second thing that I appreciate about the month is nothing against other minority groups, but Black History Month brings a focus back to Blacks. And I just think there isn't enough time and energy really spent on understanding the evolutionary culture of Blacks in America. So I appreciate that month at least brings it to some people's minds.
And Priscilla, thank you, Dr. Self.
So for me, Black History Month is very significant, or at least using the word important to me, because as someone who is African, with the recent introduction to the Black people in the diaspora, namely Black people in America, learning about the history of other people like me, that look like me, have lived continents away from me, and understanding their history and understanding just their lives, their culture, it means a lot to me. It helps me appreciate people that I have a common ancestry with, and understanding where that connection can be and what that connection can look like and how I can relate with them, and sort of coming from a place of understanding. And so Black history is very significant in that way, that it teaches me how I can relate with people that are just like me, only with very different life experiences and very different cultural connections. And so that's one of the reasons that's very significant to me.
Thank you, Priscilla. And for our listening audience, I want everyone to know that every panel I give the panelists opportunity to submit questions. So the questions that are asked at every panel come from the interest of our panelists. So there were some great questions. All the questions were awesome, but I want you to all listening in think about that when it comes to the experiences of your colleagues and how that can be duplicated when it comes to the folks that you encounter on your campuses, be it administrators, faculty, and students. So one of those pieces, and at this point, I will open it up to maybe 2 to 3 folks to answer per question, because we have a lot of questions on the table. Tell us a bit about the experiences of being the only Black person in a given space or a team. What are the challenges there? Who would like to jump in?
I can jump in if no one else is. Okay. Yeah, that's a unique situation. Let me change it. It's unique, but still concerning. My experiences have been frequently that when you're the only Black at the table, you become the Black representative. As in, when you say something, what you think, what you feel, your opinion becomes the consensus of Black people. And I've had to caution teams and groups that I've been a part of that I'm only speaking for myself. I'm not speaking for any other Black person at the institution. It's a disservice to expect one person to be able to acknowledge all the concerns and issues of everyone at the institution. And I have found out that outside of HBCUs, as you move up the ladder, you're more increasingly in positions where you may be the only Black face at the table. And it's just being cognizant of how people may perceive your responses, how they perceive your perspectives, and how they perceive your mannerisms, because sometimes that can be falsely attributed to everyone that looks like you at the institution.
Thank you for sharing that. Dr. Warren, I see you're unmuted. Did you want to speak to this?
Yeah, I'll add to what Dr. Self was saying. And, I think what he was describing is, is just a lot of pressure. When you are, that only person that can provide, a different experience, or you may not see things the same as some of your other colleagues who are not Black, it can provide pressure because now, you're having to deal with being the only person, but then 2, you're having to deal with maybe having a different perspective than everyone else. And sometimes anytime you're the only Black person or the first Black person to do anything, then that in and of itself has some pressure because there's expectations there. Some of them self-imposed, but some of them could be other people that are expecting you to do things that, you may not do because you didn't have that same experience. So I think it sums it up as saying there's a lot of pressure there.
And Priscilla, I'm curious to hear about the student experience. Tell us a little bit about that.
So I'm lucky enough in the sense that I've never had to be the only Black person in a space, but I've usually been the only vocal Black person in a space, in terms of the person who's speaking up or saying something. And so while I can't speak to the experience of being the only Black person, it's very similar in the sense that usually something comes up and I'm the only one pointing it out. People tend to look at me and say, "You're so sassy." I cannot just say how many times I've been told that, just about like that, to the point where I start questioning myself and questioning my actions and saying, am I doing something wrong? Am I too much? Am I, should I just mind my business? Should I just ignore this? And so it's had that impact on me, and it sort of made me like reduce my voice or reduce myself, because then I'm thinking, well, all these other Black people are not saying anything. And again, I mentioned before, because I purposely said that I'm an African. And so I'm like, okay, if there's African Americans in this room and they're not speaking up and I'm speaking up, then maybe I'm just doing too much. And maybe I just need to mind my business. And so that's what I've encountered with that. But I've learned through the years and just through experience that it doesn't matter, because whether it's one Black person, two Black people, three Black people, if an environment is inconducive to Black folks in general, or if it's made to not, like, they don't listen to Black voices, it's going to be inconducive for both the person who is vocal and the person who isn't vocal. And they're going to just frustrate you. And so for me, I've just found that talking is better and just going with it and making other people uncomfortable. So if you're going to make me uncomfortable in this space as a Black person, I'm going to make it my life's job to make you uncomfortable, either it's a white person or whatever person in power that is in that place. But yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Priscilla. So I saw some head scratches right there, John. I saw some folks nodding their heads. So I want to go off of this a little bit more, because what you said, I believe, resonated with so many of us, definitely with me. But let's talk about being too vocal, right? And our theme again, are we honored, celebrated, or just tolerated, or maybe something else? So is there a danger, quote unquote, or real as well? Is there a danger with being too vocal? Dr. Self.
I actually want to piggyback on what Priscilla said, because she said something that was critical, that I think that becomes a struggle depending on the seat that you sit in within the university. It's, how do I balance my need for individualism and uniqueness with the institution's need for me to be a conformist and assimilationist into the culture of the institution? And I think she really hit that without saying that explicitly, because quite often when African Americans or Blacks are brought into an institution, I don't know if there's been a thorough vetting of how does that person's idea of culture mesh with the institutional culture at that time. And I think you go into a situation being told, we want you to be you, we want to get to know you, without being given the caveat of, don't be you to the point where it starts to make us feel as if we're not comfortable with you being you. So I think what she talked about was being strong enough, being courageous enough to be you, not to be offensive. The intent is not to offend anyone else, but the intent is to not minimize yourself so that they can feel comfortable. They should have to adjust to your level of comfort, and then you find a mutual understanding of how you're going to operate, not me adjust to make you comfortable. And I think too often we end up doing that.
Thank you for sharing that. Dr. Williams.
I don't know. I'm having a little bit of a mixed response to that, in the sense that I think part of what's happening here is some intracommunal cultural differences that are taking place, particularly as it relates to geography, right? So I'm from the South. I'm a Black Southerner. I've always been loud. I've always been proud. I'm sure there are people on this call who don't like me. I don't care, right? And I think part of that is rooted in how we're socialized in the South to talk about equity issues, because it's so embedded in our culture. I grew up in Atlanta. Everywhere I go, there's a Black name on my streets. There's a Black name on my buildings. I had Black teachers, Black superintendents, right? And so I have a very unique Black experience that prepared me to feel comfortable when I move into these white spaces and not constantly question myself when I'm being gaslit, which is what I feel like Priscilla's describing. She's talking about people gaslighting her and believing that what she's seeing and what she's experiencing is somehow unreal or not what's really happening, because the other folks there have not been culturally and geographically socialized to respond to those incidents in the same way as her. And so I think when we start talking about speaking up, there's a whole lot of power dynamics that come within that, right? Who is comfortable, first of all, to say, I'm going to speak up, I'm going to speak out, I'm going to talk about what issues we're facing, one. And then on the other hand, who has more to lose than others? If the Midwest or Minnesota or the institutions in Minnesota are the only places that you've ever known and you felt comfortable, maybe you don't rock the boat as much as someone like me who's bounced around. I've worked at schools in New England, New York, the Midwest, the South, right? And if someone said to me, you're being too pro-Black at St. Cloud State, I can leave there too, right? And So there's a level of comfort for me in knowing that the risk is not the same versus this place being my home and the only education system that I know.
Ooh, that was that. Yeah, thank you. That made me, I see you, Dr. Warren. I want to let that sit in for a little bit because that was a lot. And I want to engage you just a little bit further, and I'm going to get to you, Dr. Warren, as Black women, right? The speaking up portion, the being Black in these higher education spaces, and then let's definitely talk about Minnesota, right? And I'm also not from Minnesota, San Francisco. So it is, at least when I was growing up, land of activism and all of that stuff. So speaking up or speaking out justly, it is what it is. But I know that that's also not necessarily the culture. So are you seeing, have you experienced, or even when it comes to students of color, Black female students, any, this idea of a Black woman being too aggressive because she's speaking up? You're too aggressive in these spaces. Engage with me a little bit more on that, if you don't mind, Dr. Williams.
Sure. I mean, yes, it happens every day, right? So it happens to me as a faculty member, luckily not for my direct colleagues, in part because that's what they brought me here for, right? But there are other spaces, and even I see it amongst some of my graduate students where the Black women in class might say something and everyone has this face of, oh no, here we go again, right? And so for me as a faculty member, it's on me to push on that and to force my students to question, why is that face your response? Or why are these sort of body language things happening that you're not necessarily saying? And I think that goes back to that culture of Minnesota nice that people keep trying to get me to buy into, but I'm not necessarily believing in part because for me, a lot of that is about passive aggression. And so we don't allow, particularly Black women, the space to simply exist while calling things out, without thinking of them as troublemakers and without thinking of them as someone who's trying to change the dynamics of what's happening or being too vocal. I think that happens on every level. Even if we go to some of the Black women presidents at some of our institutions in Minnesota State, I'm sure there is someone in that institution who feels like this person is too vocal about something. I think part of that comes with all types of leadership, but there's a particular level of violence that Black women face because of misogynoir, that confluence between racism and sexism, and how we constantly have to navigate both because we are both Black and women.
Yes, that intersectionality. Dr. Warren.
Yeah, I was going to make a comment, and it was based off of something Dr. Williams said about, being comfortable to speak up and speak out. And, I've had this conversation with some of my friends and family members. And, my opinion is that, the comfortability to speak up and speak out, it varies depending on the stage of life you're in and the stage of career you're in. And I think kind of what Priscilla is describing is, a life stage that she's in as a student is going to be a little different for her to be able to feel comfortable to speak up and speak out, as opposed to someone who feels like they're in a position in their career where they have gotten where they maybe want to be, or say they feel comfortable in the space that they're in. And now they're not necessarily looking to maybe advance at this particular stage. So I think a lot of times when we think about comfortability to speak up and speak out, it can really be dependent upon, like where we see ourselves going and the timing of that thing. So sometimes I think it just really falls back to, I don't want to interrupt what's happening because that may keep me from getting a promotion or, I don't know, tenure or whatever that is. And sometimes those things keep us from saying things until we feel like we get there, and then we want to do all of that. So I think it does depend on that life stage or career stage.
So something one of you touched on a little bit earlier, is the culture and the sort of expectation that folks of color and Black people, right? Black table talk. So it is what it is. Let's call it out. Black people will assimilate to a certain degree, change their behaviors, code switch, tone policing, mannerism policing, all of that stuff, right? When coming to an institution. So whether Minnesota or higher education at large, since this is being broadcasted everywhere, there seems to be a big push, right, for diversifying higher education, whether it's increasing student enrollment, and we know that the minority is now the majority. So we're going to see a lot of students of color, African-American students, Black students coming in. And then also when it comes to faculty members, administrators, and staff, right? So let's talk a little bit more about the culture of institutions. What should institutions or even organizations at large prepare for, or what should they be doing as they broaden these initiatives to bring folks of color in that they may not already be doing? So I'm looking for solutions here. What should these organizations be doing that can help improve the inclusion of folks of color and Black people?
I would say, and it may sound harsh, stop lying to yourselves. And what do I mean by that? Whether it's in higher education or any organization with all the different diversity hires, and I think Dr. Warren and Dr. Williams and Dr. Self all touched on this, is we say, okay, well, we're bringing you in, you got to assimilate to us. But in this context, when we talk about what the institution can do, we oftentimes lie to ourselves as professionals. Like, yeah, we're in a good spot to receive these individuals, and yep, they're going to be a good culture fit. And honestly and truthfully, that's not true. What institutions and organizations don't like to do is actually put the magnifying glass on themselves. We like to hire outside sources and consultants to come in and tell us what's wrong with us. And organizations, for the most part, know exactly what's wrong with them. And they're just not willing to necessarily commit to doing that work. So how can organizations get ready to bring in these diverse individuals? Tell yourself the truth. Put it in your mission statement, your vision statement, your policy, your processes, your procedures, and then follow through in what it is you're actually trying to commit to.
Thank you, John. Anyone else? Dr. Self.
Yeah, I was going to jump in. Along the same lines of what Dr. Harper is saying, I think institutions have to admit that what they think they know may actually be wrong. Because I find a lot of, in Minnesota especially, there's a lot of institutions say, well, we have racial equity, we're doing this, we're doing that. But I don't see a lot of people actually gauging whether or not that's making a significant impact. Numbers will say one thing, actual opinions are something different. And I think in the state of Minnesota, what I found is that there aren't a lot of safe spaces for Blacks to actually be honest about what they think about situations and policies. So as far as strategies, as you were saying, one, institutions need to accept the fact that their preconceived notions may actually be completely false. The second thing is they have to create an environment that will allow them to receive genuine truths. And that's a whole nother set of strategies on its own to get an institution to a point where they are ready to actually accept we may be just wrong. And it's not out of malice. I think sometimes institutions become defensive when you start questioning the culture. It's not to say that your culture is wrong or that you're doing it intentionally, but it's not working. So being able to accept that you may have to uproot everything that you're doing to get to where you say you really want to be.
Priscilla.
Oh, so I want to say that we need to, as institutions, talking about maybe MnSTATE, whatever, we need to look at what we're doing that's not just not just racist, but that it's anti-Black. Because I think sometimes we focus on this broad spectrum of racism and oppression without really digging through what is anti-Black. And when I say anti-Black, and this is something I'm recently learning about, a lot of our measures, a lot of our policies are anti-Black in their language, in their execution, in a lot of things. But we say, well, there's nothing we can do about it. It's the policy. And it's like, then you're not really doing anything because you're not addressing the things that are making the lives of Black people hard, that are making the lives of Black students hard in your institutions. So if you're not addressing your punitive measures, if you're not addressing your very, I don't know how else to say, just very anti-Black measures, right? Like, I don't have examples, there's a lot of things, but I know I'm going to give an example in the more of the K through 12 space, where it's punishing a student with detention because of some mistake versus like their white peers, right? Translating that into higher education, how we see that happen with Black students versus other kinds of students, right? And saying, saying to yourself, oh, I'm doing this because I'm teaching them a lesson. Who are you to teach a Black student how to behave? Like, that's not your job. Let their mama do that. Like, your job is to educate them and be empathetic towards them. But one things I see is that people are like, oh, we're gonna, we should train these people. But it ends up being punitive things that like punish them and like sometimes are actually violent to our students. And so if we as an institution want to change, we need to start looking at that and not just say, I'm a good person, I'm a good institution because I do dash, dash, dash. That's nice to everybody on the surface, broad level. But then look at what are your anti-Black policies? What are your things that are just hindering the lives of Black people? That's just what I want to say.
We're going to go to Dr. Williams first, then Dr. Self, and then we're going to move on to the next question. Dr. Williams.
Yeah, I just had a quick thing to add that I feel like complements what Priscilla's saying, and that is stop hiring people and bringing people into violent situations where you have no intentions of, one, actually changing, and then two, giving them the resources to support themselves and be able to survive in those environments, right? So we call that institutional betrayal, where we bring people in, we tell them the experience is going to be one way. They have a completely different experience, and then we do absolutely nothing to bridge that gap, right? So how are we thinking about the Black employees that are working at some of our more rural institutions? How are we connecting them to resources? How are we making sure that as much as we say we care about Equity 2030, here's how we're actually going to financially back that, and here's how we're going to support that, and here are the structures and systems we're putting into place to make sure that the individuals who are a part of that Equity 2030 plan are not all burning themselves out, are not all experiencing violence at the hands of their peers and their colleagues.
And Dr. Self, I'm going to come to you shortly, but that is a very poignant point, Dr. Williams. And again, for all institutions, even outside of Min States, Minnesota, to understand, especially when it comes to those rural institutions, because I also came from a rural institution and I was the only Black woman in the entirety of the institution, faculty, staff, administrator, the only, and it was completely isolating. I think for many of us, we can agree you do what you have to do because our options are not necessarily as flexible, right, as maybe others, but it's something to consider. Dr. Self?
I was just going to piggyback on something Priscilla said about institutions feeling as if it's their job to train Blacks on how to function. I'm originally from Louisiana, and I remember when I graduated from college, I graduated from LSU, and a gentleman was sitting in a room applying for a math teaching job, just like I was, but he went to Southern University, which is a HBCU back home. And I asked him, I said, man, what were your grades like? And when he told me his grades, I said, oh, well, I'm not getting this job. There's no way I'm going to get this. Your grades are way better than mine. So I go into the interview room, and the lady says, oh, you went to LSU, and she perked up. And then she said, did you take so-and-so as a professor? And then she called the professor, and that professor gave me a recommendation. And then I got the job. She didn't even interview the other guy. So it made me ask her, why did you give me the job when I know he has better grades? She said, but you went to LSU. I said, but he went to school too. She said, but you went to LSU. So I say that to say there is a belief in higher education. And I know this is another conversation for another time, that PWIs and HBCUs are perceived completely differently. And individuals that have gone to them are also perceived differently. So that what you described is extremely real.
So thank you for sharing that. So now let me ask you this question. We're all somewhat touching on this idea of inclusion and the creation of a Black village, the importance of some sort of sisterhood, brotherhood, family, right? Which can even should expand beyond the color lines if we're talking about higher education at large. But let's talk about that. What is the importance of creating a Black village, an inclusive environment when starting a new position at an institution? What should those resources look like? Why is that so important, and specifically to the Black experience?
I didn't want to be the first to jump in. Oh, Dr. Warren, go ahead.
Now I'll take a stab at it. I mean, I think it's really important because I mean we are made to be, you know, communal, and we all need family. I mean, we know that the definition of family is different for different people. It doesn't mean it has to be someone who, you know, you were born with, like a sibling or anything like that. But, you know, having that family and that community is essential because no one wants to feel isolated. Nobody wants to feel like I'm the only person. Going back to what I was saying before, when, you know, when you are in positions where you feel isolated or you feel like there's tons of pressure on yourself to basically be that token person, like Dr. Self was saying, you know, that stuff in and of itself is draining. So you have to have some place where you can kind of be able to let go and let your guard down. I just remember being in spaces before when, you know, I would talk to my wife and my family about, you know, feeling like I had to always be on, like I'm always performing. I have to continue to never allow people to see the real me, because then I may do something or say something that misrepresents the entire Black race. And being in those spaces like that, it could be really stressful and a lot of pressure. So having community where I feel like I can be myself and is not taken out of context or not misjudged or mischaracterized is very important for me and my mental health. So I think that community is important in those ways, that it allows us to not feel like we have to constantly be on and constantly be a representative for a race of people that, you know, all of us have different lived experiences.
Now, I want to talk a little bit more about that. This idea of constantly being on. So when I recall back my experience working at a rural institution, I knew I had to represent. I had to represent to the fullest, both for the white students that really had not engaged a professional, a Black professional, and also for the few Black students that we had there. So I knew whether I liked it or not, I was a representative. Period. I was the Black representative. So whether you are a student, whether you are a professional, and you spoke to this a little bit, Dr. Warren, mental health, that certainly contributes to racial battle fatigue, right? So who would like to share a little bit about how we should be looking out for colleagues or students when it comes to racial battle fatigue? How can we help students navigate that?
I don't know that I have a direct response to that, but when you said it, what it made me think about was self-care, because I think so often, at least for me, as I assume roles, the first thing I'm thinking is, what can I do to make the experience for Black people here better? And that can be draining sometimes, because you can go into an environment where you are actively pursuing that, but you're the only one. Mm-hmm. And that can sometimes create disenfranchisement. You can disconnect from an institution completely just because you want things to be better, but you're the only one. So I guess I didn't have an answer to your question, but I think all of us have experienced going into a situation where we were fully committed to making things better, but the culture may have prohibited that improvement. And it's just important to be conscious of that, I think.
Priscilla, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think that the answer to that question is back to that whole Black village thing when I think about it, because when you feel the need to always be on, when you think that you always have to represent, there is a comfort in just being around Black people that just helps you take that away. And I found that very essential for me in the fact that in a professional space, I'm around people of all kinds of identities. But when it comes to my friends, when it comes to the people that I know that feels like home for me, it's Black people. It's people that are Black and have the other identities that I also pack in me. So Black women, right? Queer people, all that stuff. It's those people that I come back to and I say, I don't have to act a certain way to you. You just get it. I look at my friend and I just look at them and they get it. You know, sometimes I get really excited at work and I would say something that I would usually say to maybe someone who's African, and I catch myself and I'm like, ugh, I forgot. I have to like go back to this American accent, like, you know, behave myself, whatever that means, right? So it's, for me, the way to just fight that racial battle fatigue is to deal with people who also experience it. The people who know what it feels like to be tired of performing, to be tired of, you know, presenting themselves in a way where they, you know, you can take your hair down, your wig down, your bonnets, and just feel at home and just feel comfortable and know that these people are there for you. And that also includes, and this might not seem like it connects to self-care, but surrounding yourself with people in the way you define family is self-care. It's not just about what you put in your face or how you're talking to your therapist or anything like that. It's also the community that you build around you, because that's very, like, you don't have to be an empath to feel energy. Everybody, I believe, feels energy. You might not be super aware of it because you're not taking conscious effort to notice it, but you can be stressed up. And that's why when we constantly deal with microaggressions, we are stressed by it, because that is a form of energy. And so just surrounding yourself outside of the space that you can control. So your workspace, you can't really control who your employer is, you know, bringing into the space, but you can control who's in your home. You can control who's in your friend group. You can control who you're texting. And so that's what I do to encourage students around me. And I try to be that person that they can feel like home to. I try to be that Black person and I know that another Black person can feel comfortable around and they can talk to about stuff. So I never feel like if someone's talking to me that they're venting and they're being too much, because I know what it feels like for someone to tell me that I'm too much. And I don't want to be that Black person that tells another Black person that they're too much when a white person is already telling them that. So that's how I feel like is a way to deal with that.
So John, let me ask you this question, then panelists who would like to jump in as well. Since we're talking about isolation, we're talking about racial battle fatigue. When it comes to either students, administrators, faculty, Black people in higher education, how important is mentorship? How important is mentorship? What does that impact, John?
Each one teach one, right? It's an old philosophy, but it's a solid one that everybody, regardless of race, color, or creed, should be doing. Anybody, anywhere, in any part of the world that can stand before people and say, I'm self-made, I did it by myself, I would submit to all of us that are in this presentation that they are a liar. No one can make it without themselves. For me personally, it has meant the world to me to be mentored by African-American men and women who have taken of their own time. Time is the most precious commodity we have on the face of the planet, because you can't get it back once it's spent and once it's used, right? I have had African-American women in my life professionally, outside of my profession, that have taken their time, talent, energy, and resources and poured into me every single thing that they could so I could be successful. In order for me to turn around, take what they gave me, build upon it, and then turn around and do the same for somebody else. To the prior conversation, and I'll wrap up with this, there's also that part of you in the back of your mind that's like, oh, wow, I made it. I can't screw this up, right? Because if I mess this up, there's not going to be another me. But it is our civic duty and responsibility to mentor young African-American men, young African-American women, so that they can build upon the legacies that already went before them and teach them what history really means. teach them what type of value and opportunity that they have, and make sure that they recognize that it's not a burden that's being placed on them. It's an opportunity to advance the work of the individuals that came before them.
Thank you for sharing that. Who else would like to speak on the impact and importance of mentorship? Dr. Self.
Yeah, I just want to add a quick caveat to what Dr. Harper said. It's not only those younger than us, but sometimes it's mentoring those that are the same age and sometimes even older than us.
Yes.
Because it's nothing more disheartening than coming to an institution and seeing someone in a role, they've been in for 15 years and you find out how old they are and you're like, what happened? That can be so discouraging to that person to put all the time and energy in, but have not known what moves to make to advance. So I think it's just as important to mentor up. And I want to add just a quick blurb to the previous discussion that Priscilla made. Just because someone's Black doesn't mean I can kick it with them. So I have to be really, really, really particular. Maybe that's a Southern in me. I don't fool with everybody. So I have to make sure that those I fool with, I see Dr. Warren laughing. I have to make sure that those that I fool with me, and then I can really let my hair down.
Dr. Williams, were you trying to jump in that one?
No, just, yep.
Dr. Watts, can I add one quick thing to this conversation? I was taught very early on, in regards to mentorship, there are 3 people that you should have in your life. And if they don't fall into one of these 3 categories, then they're a leech. The first person you should have in your life is a mentor, someone that is helping you rise to the level that they're at. The second person you should have in your life is people that are just like you, colleagues, people that are on your same level as Dr. Self was talking about. And then the third person you should have in your life is somebody that you are bringing up to the level that you're at. If they don't fall into those 3 categories, then why are they in your life?
You see, Dr. Harper, I would actually add, you need at least one hater. And I'm gonna tell you why. You need
hold on. For anyone who didn't hear, Dr. Self said you also need one hater. Okay, go on, Dr. Self, preach on it.
I need one person who hates me because I'm me, not because of anything I did, because I always want to hear what the scuttlebutt is around me. The people that are for me are going to lift me up. The people that are against me are going to give me all the feedback on what people are trying to use to tear me down. They may not even realize that they're a hater. They may think they're just neutral. But once you perceive them as a hater, that whole thing of keeping your enemies close, I absolutely keep some people close to me that I know are waiting on me for my demise. But I need that person because they're giving me information that I can then use to move forward. So I would just add a fourth, and there may not be a fourth for everybody. I need a hater. I need at least one. Sometimes 2 or 3 is even better, but I need at least one so I can get the good information from it.
That's words of wisdom. And I see you, Dr. Williams. I want to say this. When Dr. Egypt Grandison was on last time, she was speaking about it's like fuel to the fire. It just makes me go up higher. So that's what it is for me. So I feel you on that. Dr. Williams.
Yeah, I wasn't going to say anything, but I'll just add. You're funny. That's funny. That's good. I like that. I would just add that, mentorship is something that we should all think about doing. I find that the higher we go, the busier we get, the easier it is to say, I'll do that later. I'll do that later. I'll push it down the line. And I know that this is really hard to say because as Black folks, we are always asked to do service. We are always asked to give our time and our labor and our energy and our love, and usually not for pay. And so I would say a way that we can help to mitigate that is to incentivize mentorship within our institutions, making sure we're creating that infrastructure and giving people money for the time that they're investing into everyone else. It is easier to retain people across this university system or any university systems than it is to constantly recruit new people and to train them. And so an easy way to do that is to make sure folks are matched up with people who can help bring them along.
All right. And now our time goes by really fast. We're almost at the top of the hour. I say we have about 5 minutes or so left before we do a final wrap up. So let me now pose our question. Although throughout this entire hour, we have been talking about strategies and solutions, because I make it a point that we inform our listening audience on, again, strategies that you can use either for yourself as an individual or as an organization. So now I'm going to ask all my panelists, and let's say we'll give ourselves about 5 minutes for this portion, 5 to 6 minutes. So please keep your answers concise. But what strategies or solutions do you personally recommend for either individuals themselves, maybe folks who are trying to be allies, friends, or organizations? What strategies do you recommend those entities to implement to create a more inclusive and honoring environment that celebrates Black people? Who would like to go first?
I'll give a piece on the front end. Much like Dr. Williams, I have worked at different institutions. This is my first foray into the Midwest. Something that I think is critically important as we interview for positions, I know the goal is to get the job, but the goal should be to get the job being you. So I think it's critically important that we don't engage with getting the job in a way we're not going to live when we get there. I think we have to genuinely be ourselves at that interview, whatever that looks like. You have to be you so that when you get there, you can continue being you. To the inclusion part, and I'll make this quick, I just think the institutions just need to be much more honest and transparent about wanting to learn what they don't know.
Okay, thank you. Who's next?
I'll jump in really quick. I would say, it starts with institutions having the courage to change. I mean, that was something that I think that came out a lot. A lot of times when you think about institutions, we've done it this way for so long and it's been working and we're not willing to change on those things. And, from my perspective, change is inevitable. And anything that has not changed in the past has always ended up being in a position where it had to close down or something like that. So I think being willing to change and have that courage, because it's going to take courage to do something different than some of your peers, is important. And then the second thing I would say is being willing to take the risk, because there's always going to be a level of risk there. So you may change and it may not work out, but you may change and it may work out as well. So I think having that mindset that there is a risk, but the risk is worth it, is important to do.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Warren. John, Priscilla, Dr. Williams. You're up.
I was going to say, I'll jump in quickly. I have two things I'm thinking of. So the first one, I always think about that viral t-shirt that Andre 3000 had on that said, why is it across cultures darker people suffer? And so for me, I think when we talk about considering racial equity, we need to think about it in hiring, but being specific to Black people. Anti-Blackness is pervasive, and unfortunately is something that other folks of color also buy into. So it's not enough to have non-Black folks of color and white folks tasked with campus diversity without considering how they might attend to their own anti-Blackness. So if you're white or you're a non-Black person of color and you're thinking about how can I be a part of change? I think a big piece of that is reflecting on anti-Blackness and how you might advance or participate in anti-Blackness within your professional capacities. The second piece on the flip side for me is, as a faculty member, one of the things I always come back to my colleagues and ask is, strategically, what are you doing about your core syllabi and whose voices are more prominent? Did you cite a sister today? Are Black and brown people on your syllabus, or are you only talking about them during the month of February or during other heritage months, right? And so I think of that all the time, because I once had a student evaluation and I was so upset until I realized it was actually the highest form of compliment, where the student said, this was a course about students and not about diversity. And so after I got out of my feelings, I thought, well, if it's a course about students, aren't people with diverse identities also students too, right? And so there's going to be some discomfort that comes with pushing our students to rethink the boundaries of who we're talking about when we say these words like students and belonging and so on and so forth. And because I intentionally situate Black people and all other folks of color, but definitely Black people into my courses, it's going to be a little uncomfortable for folks who've never experienced that and never had to face that. And so I think a syllabus is a great way for us to practice our diversity commitments and our commitments to Black people specifically.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. John?
I'll pick up right where Dr. Williams left off, because that's exactly what I was going to say. We as institutions have to make discomfort a priority. Discomfort has to be intentional. Getting uncomfortable has to be a part of the curriculum. It has to be a part of the policies and procedures, because in that discomfort, you are going to eventually achieve your growth. Nobody grows and is comfortable. Change does not happen while everybody is flying in first class and everything's going good. No, you gotta, to quote Booker T. Washington, right? You gotta get down in the mud and raise up from the bootstraps, right? So be willing to be uncomfortable.
Priscilla?
Yeah, so I wrote mine down so I can just quickly read it out. So I think the first thing is for faculty members as a student, don't wait for your Black student to come to you, because I see that happen a lot of times where you're like, oh, if they have issues, they'll come, but I know they're struggling. That's lame. Do better. The second one is always uplift the voices of all people around you, and specific to Black voices. So just don't be dismissive. Don't think that because how someone looks, it means they're smart or not smart, that sort of thing. Don't see it as your God-given right to teach a Black person good behavior. It's not your right as a white person to teach a Black person how to behave. Please stop doing that. And then believe Black folks. The same way we talk about believing victims of assault, please believe Black folks. If a Black person comes to you and says, I feel violated by my white co-worker, please believe them, because more often than not, it is true. No one is trying to play the race card. That's like the 1970s. Stop saying that. And then higher ed has the power and responsibility to help eradicate white supremacy and anti-Blackness. And I often see the system, especially our system that we're in, shy away from that and say, well, there's only so much we can do. That's a lie. There's so much that you can do, and the system has the responsibility. If someone's being anti-Black, don't say, oh, they're tenured or it's hard, the contract. Please fire them. They're being violent to Black people. That's enough reason to remove them. Thank you, and that's all for me.
Thank you, Priscilla. And, I would even venture further to say higher education as a whole across the United States, it is a colonialist-based system, right? And we all institutions have the power and responsibility, I would say, and I'm sure we would all agree, to dismantle the oppression within those systems. Yep. So before we end our time today, I want to invite you to continue to engage in this conversation and with some of us. So I have Dr. Williams here. She hosts webinars, workshops, and presentations, and she is available for bookings. Her most recent op-ed on her viral tweet about Amanda Gorman was featured by Teach for America's One Day Studio. So you can find out more about her and her book, or book her for your campus. I'm all over the place, Dr. Williams. Book her. That's the point. Via drbritwilliams.com, and that's DRBRIT Williams.com. And then also I want to invite you, if you see the shirt that I am wearing today, it is for a new program, and I'm inviting you to attend. I will put it right here. And this is going to continue the conversation, the discussions with a broader table of your colleagues. We're going to stream live starting next Friday at 7 p.m. So be sure to join us. And then I'm also always looking for panelists. So if you would like to join me at the table here, I would love to have you. And if that is you, please email me at ida.watts@nhcc.edu. So thank you to all my panelists. Thank you for your courage, for your showing up, for your excellence. And I want to wish everyone here happy Black History Month. Our history is every day. And thank you as well to all of our listening audience. We will see you at academic